So it's very hard to find a lawyer, let alone a law professor, let alone a law professor at a prestigious school who is willing to be a little bit contrarian and willing to call out the excesses of his industry. In fact, in this whole country, I think you can count them on one hand's fingers. And joining me for the duration of today's show is one such man. His name is Professor Bruce Pardy. He is a professor of law at Queen's University. He is with Rights Probe, a charity designed to increase our civil liberties, and he joins me. Matt, what a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me, Esther. Always a pleasure.
Do you think I'm accurate when I say that at least for some ambitious, politically minded lawyers, the ultimate outcome is to become a judge?
Oh, there's no doubt that it is the ambition of many. Now, not all of them compromise themselves in search of that goal, but it's certainly a matter in the back of your mind, I would think, so that you don't, you keep yourself in the running. Don't dismiss yourself out of hand just by wandering too far outside the lines of accepted rhetoric, I suppose one might put it. Civilization is a thin veneer, and societies tell themselves stories about their institutions to hold themselves together. And some of those stories are about our legal institutions. And it works as long as the stories are mostly true. And in the recent past, one begins to wonder whether or not we've gone too far, and people are wondering if the stories are really true.
You are so right. When I was in law school, and this is more than 20 years ago, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms was such a sacred text. It had to be revered. It's as if Canada didn't exist before. It was, even though the first line of the Charter refers to, under God, most law professors skipped that part, and they thought that this was like a holy text. And yet, after 20, 25 years of hearing that the Charter of Rights is above all, I guess it's been more than 40 years since the law books. Mm-hmm. It didn't do a bloody thing during the pandemic. I can't think of one systemic case of discrimination, infringements on our civil liberties, lockdowns, shut down churches. You can't go to school. You can't open your business. You can't travel in your own country. You can't visit your family. This so-called sacred text was proven to be a nullity. I think that's exactly what you mean about the myths we tell ourselves. The mythic document was the Charter. It failed its biggest test ever.
It was a great disappointment, no question about it. It reflected, though, the faith that a lot of people put into it. And, in a way, if there's any silver lining to this COVID thing, it is in a way that for some people, a curtain has been pulled back on the way the thing actually works. And it's actually not quite true that the Charter has ever been the foundation of our legal system. And it looks like to be a very important document. It's our Bill of Rights, or the equivalent. But really, the Charter functions only as a gloss on what legislatures can do. And it's turned out to be only an interpretive guide for the courts in terms of judging what the legislatures do. So people see this document, it's written down in black and white. They think, well, they're the words, therefore I have the freedoms that are listed. But the test of whether or not you actually have those freedoms is what happens when you go into a court and say, this happened to me, please enforce my right. And then sometimes the courts say, well, I'm sorry, I know it says this, but that's actually not what it means. And in a way, this is the premise of our system, even with or without the Charter. The system is, somebody always has to have the last word. And in our system, the courts have the last word. And in particular, the Supreme Court of Canada has the last word. And there's no overseer of the Supreme Court of Canada.
And who decides? It might be 9 people in robes. It might be 338 MPs. It might be 40 million Canadians. What is that club? What is that club, and what are their rules? I can't think. In fact, I don't think our Supreme Court has weighed in on any COVID
on the COVID situation.
Or our system just wasn't speeding up. The U.S. Supreme Court got straight to, like within months, they were knocking down laws. Our Supreme Court, our system, and we sneer at the Americans, really, theirs worked. Ours literally has not gone to work.
Well, I don't disagree with you, but they have the same feature that I was describing, which is there's always got to be a last word.
That's why it's such a battle.
And the Supreme Court of the United States has the same kind of last word authority that the Supreme Court of Canada does. But one of the things that has made it work for periods of time is the philosophy that judges and courts are restrained. They're restrained because they have such power. If they're not elected, they can't be removed. The government can't remove them. The government can't overrule them. They have the last word in a very literal sense about what's going to happen in society. And so they're very powerful people. And the thing that has kept that power in check is an idea. And the idea is restraint. We will apply the law. We will interpret it in accordance with principles. We won't sort of wander off and do whatever we think is right. But we've now entered a period where more courts are inclined to think that it is their job to do the policy work and to design things so that it works in the way that they approve of.
Former Chief Justice said it's a dialogue between us and the legislators. You know, our Beverly McLaughlin, restrained was she? She was the one who said that Canada was a genocidal state, and she didn't even say so through a court case. It was just a speech. And why shouldn't she give a speech? She's a queen of all she surveys. I think it's telling that she, after finishing her tour of duty in Canada, now sits on Xi Jinping's Court of High Appeal in Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
The British judges quit when Xi Jinping took over Hong Kong. They quit out of moral solidarity with the Hong Kong people, but also they literally were not going to work for a dictator. I am stunned that Beverly McLaughlin shows up for work every day with a smile for the world's largest tyrant. I find that incredible.
Well, one of the things that's in flux now is what we mean by the rule of law. It's a hallowed phrase. It's in the Constitution, but you know there's a difference of opinion about what even that means. And here are two ideas that I like, both from Hayek. So one of the ideas about the rule of law, and one way to conceive of it is to think of it as the opposite of the rule of persons. You don't want any one person ruling over you, right? And there are a couple of ways to avoid that.
The statue of justice being blind with a blindfold.
Justice is blind. So what we do is, number one, Hayek says, rules fixed and announced beforehand. That's what the law is supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
So we can all know what the laws are ahead of time, govern ourselves accordingly, make sure we don't get into trouble, but you have to at least tell us where the lines are that we have to obey. And the second way is to divide powers between our legislature, our courts, and our executive branch, so that none of them have concentrated power.
Right, and the natural instinct is checked by the other natural
Exactly so. They're all checks and balances on each other, but both of these ideas now are eroding because all three of these branches are on the same page about the necessity for having the state manage society.
That was an excerpt from the Ezra Levant Show. I'm Ezra Levant. Every weekday, I do a monologue about the topic of the day. Then I interview a fascinating guest either in studio or via Skype. And then I read your mail, whether it's fan mail or hate mail, which is sometimes even more interesting. This is on our premium service, though, called Rebel News Plus. Go to rebelnewsplus.com. It's $8 a month or less if you buy a whole year in advance. You get my show every weeknight, plus Sheila Gunn Reid's show every week. It's called The Gun Show. It's pretty amazing. You know, we rely on you because we do not take a dime from the government. In Canada, that makes us almost unique. So please help us out and help yourself to some great journalism at rebelnewsplus.com.